Alright, howdy folks, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about the latest Burning Lands developer briefing. You can find a link to the game's store page down in the description, as well as a link to my previous video where I talk about what Burning Lands actually is. This briefing will answer one of the most asked questions on the last video: what about a console release? It also dives a little bit deeper into the game's vehicles, as well as the Kickstarter tiers and stretch goals the developers have set for themselves and the community. So I was actually very surprised to see a ton of comments asking about a potential console version of Burning Lands, and it does seem the developers have somewhat good news to share. Their final and $400,000 Kickstarter stretch goal is to have both a PS5 and Xbox Series X console version ready sometime after the PC version of the game hits version 1.0. Here is a quick look at their Kickstarter tiers. Every tier beyond the first one includes the so-called console legacy access. It appears that getting the boot tier is actually a crazy good value for money, seeing as A, you save $7 from the early access retail price when the game hits Steam, as well as you're getting both a PS5 and Xbox Series X game key down the line if and when the game does come to console. Further tiers include different backer weapons, assuming these are just different skins for certain weapons in game, extra copies to give to friends, as well as alpha or even pre-alpha access. Though for some reason, the Tunnel Rat and Spooky tiers only give respectively 1 or 2 backer sidearms, where they give 2 or 4 game keys. I guess this is where you have to decide who of your 3 friends is your favorite, as you can only give one other person besides yourself these backer sidearms if you buy the Spooky tier. Now the question is, of course, why you should back the studio. Let's take a look at their stretch goals right below, and when they reach the amount funded on the left, they'll be able to provide different features or new factions. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these because you can see them for yourself. I do definitely want to mention the Amphibious Vehicles as well as the 2 factions. One that I did see requested a few times in my comment section was the ARVN, or the Army of South Vietnam. Also, vehicle and handheld flamethrowers could be particularly nasty, especially a US PBR boat with a flamethrower sounds very fun. Talking about boats with flamethrowers, potentially, the devs do a little deeper dive into the game's vehicles, from jeeps to boats to tanks and helicopters. I want to mention right off the start that the developers write here that the heavy tanks have a maximum crew of 3. This means that tanks in Burning Lands are probably more similar to Hell Let Loose than they are to Postscriptum. Hell Let Loose, for example, the Panther has a driver, gunner, and a commander. The driver also controls the bow or hull machine gun if the vehicle was originally supposed to have it in real life as well. It's a little surprising to see the numbers though, because 120 players, which is what the game is going to be striving for, but still only having 3 people max as crew for the vehicles. Though, I'll be honest with you, being the driver in Postscriptum is kind of boring because the only thing you're doing is driving. It makes you feel more engaged with the battle when as a driver in Hell Let Loose you also have the ability to aim a machine gun, though purely through the tracers and you don't actually have a sight, and it makes the driver role feel like a little bit less of a chore and more of a fun part of the game. Anyway, here's a list of vehicles you can expect to see in Burning Lands. A little bit more of an extensive list than I had last time I made a video. Starting off with the smaller transport vehicles, we have the M151 as well as the GAZ-67 Jeeps. These normally seat 4 players, though the M151 can be armed with an M60 machine gun, and then there's only room for 3 players. Moving on to the larger transports, you have the M35 and ZIS-150 trucks that can carry troops, supplies, or both at the same time. The more supplies a truck carries, the less troops it can transport. Clearly, the decision to bring a lot of supplies and only a few men, or vice versa, can be critical depending on how the team is doing at the moment, and it's neat to see this little bit of customization being available. Moving on to armored or armed vehicles, the US has access to the M113 APC as well as the M48 Patton tank. This will be going up against the BTR-152 APC, as well as the PT-76 and Type 59 tanks on the Red 4 side. Blue 4 will also have access to a bunch of different helicopters, each with different roles in mind. The Huey will be able to transport troops as well as supplies, though there is a close air support version to harass enemies on the ground. Furthermore, a Chinook helicopter purely dedicated to transport and a Cobra purely dedicated to close air support will also make an appearance in Burning Lands. I'm honestly surprised that the developers haven't shown off any dedicated anti-aircraft systems to deal with these helicopters yet. Perhaps something like the famous ZPU would be pretty useful for the Red 4 faction. Last but not least, there is a little bit about boats and amphibious vehicles. Red 4 only has access to a sampan boat, whereas Blue 4 will get these PBRs armed to the teeth with machine guns and more. I suppose that if the Kickstarter raises the goal of $250,000, we will see amphibious capabilities for the M113, the PT-76, and perhaps other vehicles, which will greatly enhance the tactics the crews of these vehicles can put into effect in-game. So this brings us to the end of this developer briefing and this video. I'm honestly very excited to hear that a bunch more people will hopefully be able to enjoy Burning Lands if it does make its way to consoles sometime down the line. For now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.